welcome to the Diversion Authority Finance Committee meeting for September 22nd. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Here.
Dr. Mahoney.
Here.
Mr. Peterson.
I'm here.
Mr. Jacobson.
Here.
Mr. Costin.
Here.
Ms. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Redlinger.
Here.
Mr. Steen.
Here.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Here.
Mayor Carlson.
Here.
Mr. Reeds.
Here.
The quorum is present.
Thank you, Don. Next order of business is to approve the minutes of the August 25th meeting 2021. They have been distributed.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Steen. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Kent Costin seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the August 25th meeting. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Item number 3 is to approve the order of the agenda. The agenda has been distributed and printed, and it is online.
Move to approve the order of the agenda.
Thank you, Commissioner Steen. Is there a second?
Second, Carlson.
Jacobson, the
Thank
second.
you. Second by Mayor Carlson. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries to approve the agenda as distributed. Item number 4 is the approval of the bills. Mr. Kent Costin, City of Fargo.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A short list this month. There's only 3 items on the list. I think they're self-explanatory. The largest being Onsen Twitchell, the legal cost. So a total of $187,699.76 for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. Are there any questions of Mr. Costin? Don, would you please call the roll for the approval of the bills?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mayor Carlson.
Aye.
Mr. Reeds.
Aye.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Bills have been approved. Item number 5 is the finance report. Again, we call on Mr. Costin, City of Fargo.
Yes, if you refer to page 11 on the packet, the cumulative financial report, the spend for the fiscal year 2021 is $85,111,879, and a cumulative project-to-date spend of $731,348,704. Moving on to page 12, on the balance sheet side, you can see an accumulation of cash in the grand total column on the bottom right of $99,870,139. If you move on to page 13, you can see that the budget to actual with regard to the spend is at about 40% of budget, so we're clearly well under budget with regard to the overall. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. Anyone from the Finance Committee have any questions for Mr. Costin? Mr. Steen.
I move to approve the finance report.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Peterson second.
Thank you, Commissioner Peterson. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mayor Carlson.
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Next order of business is the Executive Director's Financial Report. Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, Chairman Dardis, members of the Finance Committee. So I'll start out here, typical overall status. Total program expenditures to date of $731 million. You can see here our expenditures this year have been confined to just a few different areas. Everything's still looking good, under budget. In fact, we're projecting to come in under budget this year by probably about $50 million or so. So at this point, it's just kind of monitoring the ongoing contracts and activities that are taking place. You can see, obviously, again, this year our biggest expenditures is in the lands and impacted property mitigation, and we've expended $31 million to date of the $70 million budget. I'll move to level 2 detail and just kind of go through this pretty quickly here, because there isn't anything too surprising within these numbers. So kind of move to the next page here. And you can see we did break out, at the direction of the Finance Committee last month, we broke out the settlement agreement payment and listed it as Richland Wilkin County JPA. So we're allocating that $35 million payment to that line item. And then you can see City of Fargo in-town work. We've expended about $8.8 million. So there's still quite a bit of work left to do in town this year. So that's kind of progressing along as well. And then, of course, our program support services with our management, legal, finance, and procurement still on track for meeting our budget this year. Tracking very well with the timing of where we're at, and then we have Diversion Authority operations there. We did break that out as well, so that's the administrative budget, and that is tracking well below what was anticipated. And we even broke out that administrative budget further at the direction of the last Finance Committee meeting. So any comments related to this would be welcome. We pulled out salaries, benefits, office, and then others would be office supplies, events, travel, transportation, related costs. So, Mr. Chair, that is my financial report this month.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. Questions, Mayor Mahoney?
Joel, I just have a question. You're planning on a trip to Washington next week with the team. Where does that come out of on expenses? Is that out of your administrative budget, or Kent, does that come out of somewhere else?
I don't know the answer to that, though, Joel.
That'll come out of the project budget, not the administrative budget.
Oh, okay. Yep. You'll have to tell Kent where to put it then.
Yeah, we will work on that. So,
are there any additional questions? Please, Mr. Costin.
I just had a comment on breaking out the administrative costs. I wondered if it should be footnoted that in the master indenture of trust that budget is capped. And I think, I don't know the exact formula. We got a lot of headroom in the budget, but I just think for the sake, if this is going to be a permanent report, we should solidify the thought that it is a capped budget. If you just put a footnote on there, I think that would be helpful for people that review the report. Otherwise, we could potentially go over the cap and not be cognizant of that compliance requirement.
And by the cap, you mean 1.6 million, right?
I don't, is that what it is, 1.6
Yep.
million? Okay.
it's 1.6 million, and then it escalates on an annualized basis by an inflationary rate.
Inflationary cost.
I think it'd be appropriate to footnote it.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. Mr. Paulson, would you make a note of that, please?
Absolutely.
Any other comments or suggestions, questions of Mr. Paulson? The Executive Director's financial report is for information only. There's no actionable item on that. Item number 7 is contracting items. Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, Chairman Dardis and members of the Finance Committee. We have 3 contracting actions for your consideration today. I think we'll just maybe take them one by one here. So the first one is task order number 5, Amendment 7 for Program Management Services. This is a contract with CH2M Hale Jacobs for the remaining work during implementation and construction of the diversion channel. So this is specifically related to the administration of the P3 contract. Right now, it's set up as a period of performance date of December 31st, 2026. And then the scope was updated to match the changes made in the technical requirements in the P3 RFP agreement. And since we closed on that agreement, we know what sort of services need to be provided by the PMC to administer the contract. So I'll maybe just stop there and take questions on this one, since it is a large
Questions,
task
Mr.
order.
Paulson?
I did have one.
Please, Mr. Costa.
Yeah, Joel, I noticed as I was reviewing the details of those components and subcomponents, the changes aren't major from period to period, but there was one category, it was called resiliency and sustainability, and it was programmed at about 316,000. I'm not familiar with what that term means and why that would be included in the budget for, I think, for next year.
For the sustainability resiliency component of the
Yes.
Jacobs contract.
Yes.
Yeah, so that would pertain to the work that their subcontractor Luceo is doing related to Envision on the project. And that would be contained within the task order. However, we wouldn't move forward with initiating that work without formal direction to Jacobs. So right now, they're doing a lot of work related to the federal funding component, and we'll be going to DC next week with a contingent of board members, as the mayor had mentioned. And they've been providing us a lot of content to give to legislators and to the agencies related to the infrastructure bill that's currently being considered, as well as I'm happy to report today that the continuing resolution passed Congress as well, and that did contain an additional $3 billion for the core civil works program, of which $1.5 billion will go to the Hurricane Irma relief. The other $1.5 billion will go into the construction account. So that, combined with the dollars being considered within the infrastructure bill, is somewhere around $13 billion of additional funding into the core work plan. So it's very important that we're meeting the funding requirements of that. And a lot of that has to do with resiliency, sustainability, climate mitigation, those sorts of things. So the resiliency program is supporting our efforts to achieve those federal funding dollars. And so that's why we have included that within the ongoing program management services. Because the Corps appropriates on an annual basis, we're anticipating having to go back for the remaining money year over year in order to receive the appropriations for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So.
Yeah, and I wasn't questioning the expense. I was just, for my own educational purposes, what exactly it was for, just as a reminder, and I'm starting to recall actions taken in the past to fund that. So it's just a good reminder that we got somebody documenting the system.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. Mayor Mahoney.
No, this is a $30 million item, so my presumption is you as chair have looked at this with Rick as well in more detail, because the detail in the packet's not a great amount of detail, but Commissioner Dardis, or Mayor Dardis, I assume that you and Rick have done this in some great detail with the team?
We went several levels. I can't say we went to level 7, but we did, yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just, for the other members on the commission or on this committee, it's a significant look at it, but it also is running with what we had anticipated over time as well. So it's not larger or smaller than we expected. Is that correct on budget, Rick?
Correct.
It's what we anticipated in our budget?
Yes.
Thank you.
If I may, one question on this, and kind of relation to that, there's a discussion here, and I talked to Paul earlier, so I'm clear on this, but on the page 1 of that description, towards the bottom, it says this is a cost increase amendment of $30,236,000. Kind of caught my attention. And it's really a budgeted item. It's not an item that was in the program cost, but not yet budgeted, as I understand it. Right. So when it says here, this is a cost increase of $30 million, it definitely got my attention, but that's not what it is. So, if I'm correct.
You are correct, Commissioner Steen, yes. Yeah, we have not touched the contingency yet for the project.
And one other question,
Please,
Dardis.
Mayor.
So when this venture started, and Joel, you took your position, part of it was that we were looking at different ways to save money for the project. And Hill Jacobs' mission, or what they were providing for the diversion initially, was one bucket. Has that mission changed over time? So if I would look at a budget, let's say 2 or 3 years ago, would it still be 30 million, or would it be a different number that we'd see? Because you've hired Chris, you've hired other people. Have you set in motion some things that actually saved us money?
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Yes, we have. So as we've been hiring staff, we have been transferring appropriate scope over to those staff members. However, I think some of the duties of staff are related to the public side of administration that just couldn't have been accomplished by the PMC anyhow. Specifically, I'm talking about maybe the work that Mr. Redlinger and Mr. Wilson had been doing as the co-executive directors, the work that Mr. Costin does, and Mr. Monplaisir had done at the county. Some of that transferred over to the scope. As far as this amendment is concerned, it doesn't really apply to our public side staff. This was always been contemplated for Jacobs to administer the P3 contract, because the public side staff just doesn't have the experience in administrating a P3 contract. So Jacobs is bringing in folks that have done this type of work before. They know how to do it, what to check for, what to look for, and that was always been contemplated. So I believe, Mayor, if we did go back and look at what the budgeted, anticipated budget was, it would still be the 30 million that was contained within that.
The support data for Task Order 05 Amendment 7 is 17 pages long, and there's a lot of detail on it and the like, but we did go through that very thoroughly, Mayor.
Yeah, we had a number of sessions with Chairman Dardis and and Commissioner Steen. And they really asked a lot of good questions, if you can imagine. So we did dig pretty deep into it. I also had personal meetings with Jacobs as well, and went through prior to meeting with them to ensure that everything met expectations as well.
I'm disappointed that Commissioner Steen didn't save us 30,000, but I'll have to move to approve.
All right, we'll take these actionable items one at a time. I have a motion to approve the Jacobs Task Order 05 Amendment 7. Is there a second, please? Second. Commissioner Steen seconds. It's been moved and seconded. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mayor Carlson.
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Continue, please, Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second contracting action is a master service agreement with Neon Loon Consulting. This is related to support services for our communications department. Neon Loon is a company that was responded to an RFP that we did, and so we did receive multiple RFPs. We assessed the capabilities and determined that Neon Loon would be the best value to support our communications department. And this is kind of related to the request of the board and the finance committee earlier this year to go through an RFP process to ultimately land on a communications support consultant. So right now we're not prepared to bring forward any task orders, but we would like to get the master service agreement in place and I'll run a very small administrative task order to just start to try them out and see how they fit with the public staff, and then bring more of a robust task order that would support FY22 next year if everything works out okay. So.
Mayor Mahoney.
Joel, is this a substitution for PR for Good? Will this be the different group that's taking over for PR for Good?
That is correct.
And a local contractor?
That is correct. They are local.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there a second?
Jacobson seconds.
Thank you, Dan. Been moved and seconded to approve the Neon Loon Master Services Agreement as presented for the Neon Loon. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes?
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mayor Carlson.
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Mr. Paulson?
All right, and the third contracting action for the board's consideration today is change order number 7 for work package 43G. This is work that Industrial Builders is doing out in the Oxbow Wetland project, I believe. And there was some additional fill that was required within an area that had unsuitable material. And so we are asking for, or the contractor is asking for a change order of approximately $77,000 for additional fill.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. Questions for Mr. Paulson?
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mayor Mahoney. Is there a second, please?
Pepcorn second.
Thank you, Commissioner Pipcorn. Been moved and seconded to approve the industrial business change order for the tune of $77,840. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mayor Carlson.
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
Yes.
That is everyone.
And Mr. Chair, I'll just make a note that there were no cash budget adjustments this month. So we, as discussed at the last Finance Committee meeting, we will start to report out if we make any budget adjustments between categories, but there were none to report out this month. So.
All right, thank you. Item number 8 is other business. First order of business is the draft of the 2022 cash budget.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this was provided in your packet. Not sure if the committee would like to go line item by line item. I will start out to mention that we have done extensive work with Chairman Dardis and Commissioner Steen on each one of these line item, and we've dug into any questions that they had. And so I think maybe we'll just take it large categories first, and then just see if there's any questions, Mr. Chair. That might be the best way to approach it. Or...
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Paulson.
Okay.
Any of the Finance Committee members have questions on this? Again, I'll remind you, this is a draft only. It's for information at this meeting. We're not approving this, so I'll have some more time to study it if that's what you choose to do. But we take any questions at this time. Most of the questions that Commissioner Steen, and I don't need to speak for him, obviously, but we're on land acquisition and mitigation as to how what the 2021 budget is, what's projected for 2022, and those like. And then also on the in-town flood protection, as you can see, you know, there's some large dollars that have been set aside for that. And there's about $8 million, I believe, that the city of Fargo is on there. And so there's discussion about that, of how are those projects coming in and all that type of thing. And then the other item that was of major interest, and I'm going to ask Joel or Paul, please, was the diversion channel and associate infrastructure. There was considerable discussion on the bridges and how we're going to handle BNSF on the payment of that, and whether or not there's going to be a lump sum payment for operations and maintenance going forward. So that was a little bit confusing, but get through it. Paul did a nice job. So, Paul, would you like to address that? Those are the major items that that I noted during the discussion on it. As you'll see that the budget for 2021 is $31,020,000, and actual cost to date is $554,000. And so the draft for 2022 is for 33 million. So please, Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Within the channel construction and mitigations, that includes all of our utility relocations. And so the costs to date have basically just been the engineering for those costs. That's why you see the difference between the actual and the estimated at completion. We have a number of utilities that will be relocating for the channel that the Diversion Authority will be paying for. Those bills we expect to come in by year complete. And so that's where that $10 million is. There is about a $15 million estimated payment for operations and maintenance with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway. It's our experience with previous coordination with the railroad that within their process of assigning a permit to the Diversion Authority to build the bridges. Okay, so we are going on to their property to make an improvement or make an adjustment to their facilities. So instead of an at-grade rail line they have now, we will be building a bridge. The cost for building the bridge is included in the P3. However, BNSF will want to own and maintain that bridge. So the cost of the maintenance of that, all the other bridges within the P3, we have that 30-year cost built into there. However, Burlington Northern, they typically request an operations and maintenance kind of payment for the permitting of their work. So basically, they're going to say, look, you've built a bridge, you've added to our infrastructure, we need some additional costs to cover the maintenance of these structures in perpetuity. And so they typically ask for that up front. Our estimate was be about a $5 million cost per location. We cross the BNSF lines in 3 different locations. So there's a $15 million that we had expected to spend this year, but with the slight delay and coordination with BNSF has been slower than anticipated due to some staff turnover there. We don't anticipate that being signed this year. And so there's $15 million that were in the 2021 cash budget that are now basically sliding to the right into the 2022 cash budget.
Thank you, Paul. Mayor, you had a question?
Yeah, just a question, Joel. We see Oxbow, Hickson continue to be on here, and I think you had a cost of 42 million or something like that. Are we done with it next year? Are we finally done with that? And then I'm a little curious. Oh yeah, it's WP43 Oxbow, Hickson, Baki. It's 42, and then next year we're going to spend an additional million or so on it. Is that all that's left? If we look at, and you may not have this today, but if we looked at overall cost of that sometime, could we have a report of what Oxbow cost us overall? Because I see you have 42 million, but I was under the awareness it was 100 million or something.
Yeah, that's for the construction. As you can see, cost to date, 2684,824. That's the construction and MOU costs. We still have about 14 million worth of ring levy to complete around there. The Corps is actually building some of it, included that portion of it within their I-29 road race. So there is some additional work that we have to do there for construction. The overall cost, we can pull that in when you start adding utility costs, relocation costs, lands and other residential relocations will work that way. It probably will be over that $100 million mark.
Thank you, Paul. Anyone else on the Finance Committee have a question? Mr. Costin?
Yeah, I had a question with regard to the detail of the channel construction. Just as a point of reference, is that all P3 payments, or is that a combination of a variety of subcontractors?
So that's going to be all related to utility relocates. So we are not anticipating making any payments to the developer next year. The way the milestone payments work is the project's partitioned into buildable units. So one buildable unit would be a bridge, say. So until that bridge is entirely complete, you don't make payment on it. So a majority of the milestone payments will be coming in later years as the developer completes buildable units and components of the diversion channel. So maybe not all of it, but a majority of all of the diversion channel and associated infrastructure is related to our obligation to the utility companies to pay for those relocates to get them below the channel grade.
Yeah, and I kind of where I was going with my inquiry was, at some point in time, wouldn't it seem to make sense to segregate the P3 contract into this budget report so that you can see as these milestone payments start to occur, that we're in fact paying them and reporting them at that level, because they are so significant in relationship to the total project. Otherwise, it's all mushed into the $950 million program cost, and there might be multiple things within that category. And, you know, as fiscal agent, we track those P3 payments and we'll be making them. It might be helpful to have it broken out in the budget that way in the future.
Yesterday at the diversion head chairman's meeting, we did discuss that, and we discussed a number of other items as to how Mr. Paulson, Paul, and also Mr. Shockley, with all the different funding levels of how that's going to unroll for us in 2022. And I've asked them at our October Finance Committee meeting that the three of them combined to give us a report as to how that will break down and how it will be accounted for. So that is forthcoming.
And I did have another question. This is more broadly speaking, but with regard to the state appropriation, one of my staff people asked today, when are they going to send us that big chunk of money? And I said, you know, I don't really know, but I have a meeting today. I'd be happy to ask. Is that something that is in the foreseeable future, or do we know how that's going to be dispersed to us?
Mr. Shockley stepped to the microphone and has a big smile on his face. So I'm assuming he has good news for us.
Great, very timely question. We submitted a schedule of North Dakota PFA and Bank of North Dakota. We're envisioning that it will come in 4 draws. North Dakota PFA did not want to have one large bond issue. They wanted to make sure that we would be able, as they bonded for it, we could spend it. And so we tried to build a spend schedule in which they would bond for it and we would be able to spend it. So it'll be, and I don't have the specific numbers, but off the top of my head, I think the first tranche is about 90 million. The second tranche is about 80 million. The third one is about 70. And then the fourth, which would be in June of 2023, would be a little bit over 100. So.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
I'd like to invite Mr. Costin or any other member of the Finance Committee, and if we're going to have another preliminary meeting before the October meeting with regard to some of this discussion, you know, at this point in time, it's been Mr. Steen and I, but we'd certainly make that call out to any and all members of the Finance Committee to certainly join us and, you know, jump in on the questions as well. So,
Mr. Chairman, could you try to make it soon that we know that, whatever your guys' schedule is, so we can make a
we certainly will.
Schedule.
We got it. Okay. So again, any other discussion on the draft of the 2021 cash budget adjustments?
Mr. Chairman, I just suggest, Joel, whenever you have a draft, it's a draft and it's outlined on your paper. Otherwise, it looks like a final product and we've been caught sometimes with, is this draft or is this a final draft?
We did debate putting that on there, Mayor Mahoney, but wanted, with the copies and overwrite of it, we wanted it to be clear for you to understand or to see underneath it. So we can do that. We'll do that next time, at least on the top line, but didn't want to obscure any of the figures.
Thank you, Paul. Again, any additional questions on this information of our cash budget? Okay, moving on. That's not an actionable item because it's only a draft. We'll go to item B, is the DA board approval of the MOU and agreement actions. Mr. Shockley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Finance Committee. Today we have a number of MOUs and MURAs. The first is a MOU between the Pleasant Township and the Metro Flood Diversion Authority regarding the Southern Embankment and associated infrastructure. And I would say congratulations goes out to Chris Bockyard. There's a ton of work that went in behind the scenes working with the township on this MOU. This was particularly challenging, and without having, just to be frank, without having like a public employee leading that charge, I'm not sure we would have gotten to the finish line on that, because it was it took a lot just to negotiate it out with the township. We have a summary. It really addresses the design, construction, operations, and maintenance regarding construction of the Southern Embankment and associated infrastructure. The second MOU is an MOU between Casserole Water and the Metro Flood Diversion Authority. This is for the diversion channel. We're starting to finish up the MOUs for the remaining utilities along the diversion channel. This really addresses the relocation of Casserole Water's pipelines. They have large and small pipelines along the diversion channel. As the developer is building a diversion channel, they'll have to cut off the old ones, put in new ones, and reroute and make sure that the connections are hooked up. There is a MOU for the diversion channel and associated infrastructure with Sprint and the Metro Flood Diversion Authority. This is once again regarded to relocating the utilities on the diversion channel. And then finally, we have a MOU between Minn, Kota and the Diversion Authority regarding the Southern Embankment. Once again, this is in regards to utility relocations occurring in the Southern Embankment. I would notice that the Minn Kota one is what we refer to as a MURA, and what that means is there's no cost directly with this agreement, but as utility relocations need to take place, the Diversion Authority staff works with Minn Kota. We've sort of set the ground rules. They come up with a task order and they relocate the different infrastructure. The reason that we do that is in the Southern Embankment as compared with the diversion channel, the Corps is constructing the Southern Embankment in a traditional manner. And so you have different work packages. And so we don't know all at once what utilities need to be relocated and when they need to be relocated. So the task order system was a more cost-effective way than having us having to redraft a new contract every single time we had a utility relocation. I would note this has been really good progress in getting these utility agreements wrapped up, and it's progress for the project. I can answer any questions you might have. Very routine, very similar to the utility agreements and MOUs that you've seen before.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Finance Committee will go by your direction if you want to. These are actionable items, and so if you want to do them all at once or one at a time.
Would move to approve all 4 of the action items, and Chris, good job with Pleasant Township. That's
Thank you, Mary Mahoney moves. Is there a second?
I know we were concerned about it, and it's really great to hear that you made progress with them. And although they seem pleasant as a township, sometimes I'm sure you had interesting meetings. Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second, Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the MOUs and agreement actions as outlined by Mr. Shockley, items 1 through 4. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin. Ms. Johnson. Ms. Johnson. Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mayor Carlson.
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Next order is the resolution authorizing the financial close. Mr. Shockley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Finance Committee. It's my pleasure to present to you the resolution authorizing financial close. The financial close for the P3 component of the project is now scheduled to occur on October 14th. I'll just briefly touch upon what does that mean. So we went through commercial close earlier in August, and that's in which we signed the project agreement. During the time period between commercial close and financial close, the developer assembles all of their private financing. And that is going to include a private placement loan of about $700 million, private bonds in the neighborhood of about $200 million, and then private activity bonds of about $296 million. And so the developer goes out and secures his financing so that it has the money available at financial close to provide to its DNC contractor, the design and construction contractor. So internally within their team, they'll issue this debt, and it's a fixed price contract within their team, and they go start construction. As they complete buildable units and file a milestone payment, we make the payment to them. So the authority actually has infrastructure in the ground before you're actually making payment. As part of the sale of those obligations, we have a number of things going on. First of all, we have an update to the financial model that the team submitted with its bid versus close. The benefit is that the financial model, because of our work with them, has reduced, it will reduce the availability payment that's due each year. And so that's a benefit to the authority. So we're amending the project agreement to substitute in that new financial model. The second item is authorizing Joel to execute what's called a continuing disclosure undertaking. Every year, as part of the bonds that they've issued, just like a city or a county, there's certain disclosure requirements that have to be undertaken. Even though the authority is not issuing the bonds, obviously somebody who buys the bonds wants to make sure that the authority is paying its bills, that it's collecting the sales tax, etc. So every year we have to file a simple disclosure. Next month they'll talk about maybe potentially hiring a dissemination agent. They're very cost effective, or having the fiscal agent do it. We can talk about that next month, but the resolution authorizes the signing of the continuing disclosure undertaking. The lender's direct agreement was a document that was actually attached to the master indenture of trust. And so the lender's direct agreement sits in between the master indenture of trust and the developer's indenture of trust. So if you think about it, it's like the center of the hourglass or the spider web. We make our payments, they go through the lender's direct agreement, and then it goes to the developer, and the developer filters it through its waterfall and repayment of debt obligations. And so you've already seen the lender's direct agreement and the master indenture of trust, but it just gives authorization for Joel to go ahead and sign that. The trustee has to sign it, the fiscal agent has to sign it. Everybody's seen the agreement, but just kind of the belt and suspenders. Next week, we are going to begin marketing of the developer's debt obligations. So there's a process where it goes to market, and we get bids. And during that time period, we'll get bids on the different maturities of the PABS bonds. The authority is part of that. And it's also part of the bond sale. And so there's a check and balance, so to make sure that they're not overpricing, as Kent probably is more familiar with it than most, but you can play around with premiums and maturities and take money out of a transaction. And so we have a check and a balance system built in the project agreement where during the sale, we actually sit on the line with them. They pick a maturity, they sell it, we have to consent to it, and we go back and forth. And so there's a huge check and balance in the process. And then we have EY on the line to make sure that it's consistent with the financial model and consistent with the models that we ran early on in the process. Once we have the sale results, then we go through the typical closing process where where the developer is finalizing all of their bond documents. And on the 14th, we'll have everything signed. And at some point during the day, we'll say the transaction's closed and the deal's in place, so to speak. And so this resolution authorizes the executive director and the chair to sign the documents that are necessary to get through financial close. I can certainly answer any questions that you have. It's quite an in-depth process. We kind of like to say it's like the duck swimming in the water. You see the duck, gently going, but the legs are going 90 miles an hour. That's kind of how the financial close has been.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Questions? This is part of the reason that Rick and I had asked Joel and John and Paul at the next meeting that we have some discussion on the change management process, the contracting process for the P3, the risk allocation, and the payment process, because the milestone payments have gone away. We got 57 units, but there's also availability payments, which I really don't understand. And well, hopefully Mr. Shockley or Mr. Paulson can share that better with us. And then maintenance and operations. I reached out to Mr. Costin recently last week, and he provided us some additional information on sales tax information of collections for Cass County and Fargo, based on the 1.5% growth is what we anticipated versus the actual. It's a very positive report. We'll wait till next month, and I'll, Mr. Costin, if you'd update that, and we'll let you share that report, but it's very positive. And the reason that I asked that question is Mr. Shockley had made a comment months ago to me at one point in time with regard to maintenance and operations and how we might apply how we're going to service that debt on maintenance and operation based on what our sales tax collections are. And so I think that when Mr. Shockley gets ready to present that to us, it's very important that we know the facts of what Mr. Costin has shared with me last week. So it'll all come together. So that's anything else for you, John? Any questions for John?
Maybe just a clarification point on the availability payments. So we currently, with the closed project agreement, we already have in place what our availability payments are. With the change in the financial model, we're going to lower those availability payments. And the availability payments, as a rough split, the milestone payments, so we'll just say the P3 agreement is $1 billion. There's about 60% is in milestone payments, and about 40 to 45% is in availability payments that's spread over the 30-year period of the project agreement after substantial completion. And so what happens why it's so important on that PAB sale is the more savings that we can gain, it starts to lower your availability payment. And so the interesting part about a P3 transaction is sometimes you can save more on the commercial side than on the construction items. And so that's why we have such an important check and balance system. On the operations and maintenance side, that's not going to change. We already have our operations and maintenance availability payment. That was part of the bid that developer gave us. But that just covers the channel, and I think there's a larger discussion about the whole operations and maintenance for the entire project, the southern embankment, the in-town works. There'll be some operations and maintenance costs incurred as part of the AMP plan, and I'm forgetting what AMP's adaptive management and mitigation plan. There's a number of other operations and maintenance items that we're getting more clarity around, and I think by the end of the year we'll be able to take some of those numbers and we'll have a much better, clear picture of what the final operations and maintenance cost looks like, both from we know what the P3 side is, but the entire project. There's still going to be some unknowns, but through this process, it's, we're slowly getting closer and closer to what the final numbers are. So,
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Mayor, do you have something?
Mr. Shockley, I'm only disappointed that you didn't show us where's Waldo, where you show where all the money moves, goes Bank of North Dakota, comes over here in your big spreadsheet. So I hope you'll have that ready for tomorrow. But I very much want to congratulate you on this work. I think you also said we saved some money as well. So there is additional funding that we'll get back to the project because of your hard work. I appreciate all of that. And the second thing I want to do is appreciate all the people in the community that are spending money, because both the county and the city are seeing higher tax returns than we expected. And we wanted to do the 1.5, but we're much higher right now, going at a much higher rate. I would move to approve the financial closed document.
Is there a second, please?
Peterson, second.
Thank you, Commissioner Peterson. John showed me his diagram one time, and this is what it looks like. So we have a motion and a second. Don, would you please call a roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mayor Carlson.
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Mr. Shockley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One just quick update, a good piece of news. As part of the bond sale for the developer and private placement, we were able to secure a third-party opinion that designated the product as what's called green bonds. And green bonds are marketed to investors that are looking for bonds that are sustainable and resilient. And you end up paying a slightly lower interest rate than you would with a typical bond, because people want that as part of their investment portfolio so that they can say they're a green investor. It's not a huge interest savings. It's maybe 6-7 basis points, but when you're talking about the scale of the debt, it adds up over time. So just another kind of positive item.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Mr. Paulson.
I just want to make a note to the Finance Committee that I do have a position out on the market right now for a finance director, and that's with the intent to try to keep up with John. So as you can see, it's certainly necessary. A lot of moving parts going on here, and I think Mr. Dardis's graph is absolutely accurate as far as our financial arrangements concerned. So.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. Next order of business is property acquisition status report. Mr. Dodds is traveling. We have Dean Vetter with us today. Mr. Vetter?
Thanks, Finance Committee. Good afternoon. This is our usual property status overview for your review, I guess, today. I'm going to stop on this page real quick. A couple of changes from the last one that you've seen. We have signed an additional purchase agreement there in the last month, and we actually have a few others that have signed in the meantime as well that didn't make this report. Acquisitions, maybe one back here, Don. Okay, yeah, perfect. 7 parcels that we've acquired there in the green that have been acquired since the last month, and then one maybe good thing to report, the very bottom red, darker red, is the acquisition via last resorts. We did actually have 2 parcels that we acquired, and those were from the channel that we did reach an agreement on as well. So that added to our acquired status as well. There's a various, on the following pages, environmental monitoring and much more detail behind each one of the sub-projects, and we'll probably just hold off on going over that unless someone has a specific question on any of those.
Thank you, Mr. Vetter. Questions of lands or property acquisitions?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any member of the Finance Committee have anything that they'd go to the order? Mr. Paulson? Mr. Shockley? All right. Our next meeting will be October 27th. Look forward to seeing you all. Thank you for your time today. We stand adjourned.